To make a loom out of cardboard for circular weaving, you're going to need a flat piece of cardboard, some scissors, a pen, a ruler, and a calculator. And what we're doing is cutting out a circle with an odd number of notches cut out around the edges where we're going to string up our yarn to warp the loom. You need an odd number to ensure that you're alternating which spokes you're going over and which spokes you're going under every time you come back around the circle. If you're doing an even number of spokes, you're just going to keep going over the same one, the same every time. With an odd number, you're going to be going over and under in an alternating pattern, creating this structured weave. Now, to cut out your loom from the cardboard, you're going to be starting with three main questions. How big is your loom going to be? How many spokes are there going to be? And how far apart are the spokes? If you can answer any two of these questions, you can find the answer to the third one. You're probably going to know what your diameter is because it's based off of how big your cardboard is. So the diameter is equal to the distance between the spokes times the number of the spokes divided by pi. And you can find how many spokes there are if you just rearrange that formula and multiply the diameter times pi and divide it by the distance between the spokes and round to the nearest odd number. And if you just need to find out how far apart your spokes are going to be, then you're going to do the diameter times pi and divide it by the number of spokes. So I just want to find out how far apart my spokes are going to be. I already know how wide my diameter is because of how big my piece of cardboard is. And I'm going to show you an easy way to eyeball the number of spokes you're going to need. Use something round to trace and cut out your circle. Take a ruler and draw lines across the center from top to bottom, dividing it evenly like a pie into however many spokes you want it to have. And when it looks good to you, just add 1 to the number that you've reached when you've divided it evenly. So I crisscrossed 8 lines, giving me 16 spokes, and I added 1 to that number. So my loom is going to have 17 spokes. And it's totally fine to stop there and just eyeball it and cut notches around the edge, but I wanted to figure out how to evenly space them. We're going to take the diameter of the circle we've cut out, multiply it times pi, and divide it by the number of spokes. So in my case, my diameter was 180 millimeters, and pi is 3.14, and my odd number of spokes was 17. So each spoke is going to be about 33 millimeters apart, and I'm going to go ahead and cut those notches in the cardboard. So now we're going to take some yarn and wrap it around the loom through those notches that you cut, and this is called warping the loom. We're going to take our yarn and pull through the top notch that you cut so that it's longer than half the diameter of the circle. I taped mine down to hold it in place, and then flipping your loom over so you're looking at the front, you're going to pull your yarn down from the top notch to the bottom notch, directly across from it. Pull that through the bottom notch and up around the back to the notch to the right of the one you started on. Back down to the one to the left of the one at the bottom. And keep winding all the way around until you've wrapped all the way to the first notch again. You'll have 2 little tails coming up from the notches next to each other on the bottom and 2 spokes coming through the top notch together. Something to keep in mind is that if you want your end product to be flat like a coaster, you're going to want to warp really loosely. But if you would like the edges to curl up like a basket or a bowl, pull that yarn tight while you're wrapping it through those notches, warping the loom. Now those 2 tails at the bottom of the loom, you're going to take the first one and pull it up under the yarn through the center. The second tail is going to go under the yarn perpendicular to that one, so you can tie them together and center all the spokes in the back of the loom. Then you're going to flip your loom over and thread a yarn needle with the yarn that you want to start weaving with. Your yarn needle with the new yarn in it is called your weft, and that's what's going to go over and under the spokes to create that woven pattern. And the first thing you're going to do is, once you've cut a piece of yarn to use, is go under that double spoke that's coming out of the top notch on the front of your loom. Pull the yarn through all the way to the end and tie a knot in the center of the loom, drawing those 2 spokes together into one spoke and centering all of the spokes in the middle of the circle. Once you've tied that knot around the double spoke, turning it into a single spoke, you're going to go under the next spoke and over the spoke after that, under and over, for as long as you want to keep using this color. And you're going to use as much yarn as you're comfortable with working. It could be a foot, couple feet long, It could be shorter or longer depending on whether you want to switch colors as you're going along. And you can choose to use a bulkier yarn if you don't want to have to go around as many times to fill out your loom. Also, if you don't have a yarn needle, you can cut a little piece of cardboard with a hole in one end, and that works just as well for a weft. Sometimes even better with the bulkier yarn that's harder to thread through a needle. A couple things to remember: whichever color yarn you use for the spokes to warp the loom is going to be visible in the center, and it's probably better to use a thinner yarn to warp the loom and make those spokes because it's going to pile up in the middle where they all crisscross. So once you get close enough to the edges or as big as you want to have woven, you're going to start taking the spokes off of the loom. And to do that, you're just going to cut through the back yarn. So I'll have 17 little tails for each spoke. There's a few ways to finish it. In this example, I took all of the spokes off the loom and then I tied each one in a double knot to the spoke next to it. And then I went around and just trimmed the tails off. If you know how to do macrame, you can do those kinds of knots around the edges, or you can weave a border around the edge using another kind of yarn. Good luck and have fun!